The scorching sun beat down mercilessly upon the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge, nestled at the edge of the Sonoran Desert, where red rock mesas rose like ancient sentinels against the endless sky. It was the summer of 1887, and the air shimmered with heat that made the distant mountains dance like mirages. Dust devils whirled across the main street, past the weathered storefronts and saloons that comprised the heart of this remote settlement. In a modest adobe dwelling on the outskirts of town, 19-year-old Clara Bennett knelt beside her father's bed, pressing a damp cloth to his fevered brow. The consumption had taken hold of him 3 months prior, and each day brought new struggles. The small room smelled of sage and sickness, the windows covered with flour sacks to keep out the brutal afternoon sun. "Papa, please try to drink something," Clara whispered, lifting a tin cup to his cracked lips. Thomas Bennett's eyes, once bright with the determination that had brought them west 5 years ago, now gazed at her with the glazed look of a man who knew his time was running short. "Clara," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the cicadas' drone outside. "Harlan Blackwood. He came by again yesterday." Clara's hand stilled, the cloth dripping water onto the packed earth floor. She knew what was coming, had known for weeks now as their debts mounted and the medicine ran low. Harlan Blackwood owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, his influence stretching like the shadows of the saguaro cacti at dusk. He was 43 years old, with cold gray eyes and hands that had never known gentleness. "He's offered to pay for the doctor from Tucson," her father continued, each word an effort, "and to settle our debts with the general store." "In exchange for what, Papa?" Clara asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Thomas Bennett turned his face to the wall, unable to meet his daughter's gaze. "You're to be married come Sunday." The words hung in the stifling air like vultures circling. Clara stood abruptly, the tin cup clattering to the floor. Through the window, she could see Blackwood's men in the distance, watching their home like wolves waiting for wounded prey. "I won't do it," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Mama wouldn't have wanted—" "Your mama is dead," her father interrupted, a harsh cough racking his thin frame. "Been dead these 4 years, and I'll be joining her soon enough. You think I want this? But what choice do we have? You'll starve without protection. At least with Blackwood, you'll have a roof over your head." Clara fled the room, her mother's worn boots kicking up dust as she ran to the small stable behind their home. Their old mare, Buttercup, nickered softly as Clara buried her face in the horse's mane, tears flowing freely. She remembered her mother's last words. "Be strong, my desert rose. Don't let anyone break your spirit." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations Clara wanted no part of. The town's women came by with a borrowed wedding dress, their eyes full of pity and relief that it wasn't their own daughters being bartered away. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house tried to console her. "Mr. Blackwood's not so bad once you get used to his ways. You'll have fine things, dear servants, even." But Clara had seen the bruises on the Mexican girls who worked in Blackwood's house. She'd heard the whispers about his first wife, who died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years after their marriage. The thought of his hands on her made her skin crawl like scorpions in the night, on the eve of the wedding. Clara lay awake listening to her father's labored breathing and the coyotes howling in the distance. The moon cast silver light through the window, illuminating the wedding dress hanging on a peg like a shroud. She made her decision then, swift and certain as a rattlesnake's strike. Moving silently, she gathered what little she could carry: a canteen of water, some dried beans and jerky, her mother's silver locket, and the old Colt revolver her father kept hidden beneath the floorboards. She saddled Buttercup with trembling hands, whispering apologies to the darkness for leaving her father behind. The desert night was cool, a blessed relief from the day's heat. Clara guided Buttercup along the narrow trails that wound between the towering saguaros and chollas, their spines gleaming like needles in the moonlight. She had no clear destination, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the fate that awaited her at sunrise. She had ridden perhaps 5 miles when she heard them, the thunder of hoofbeats behind her, growing closer. Blackwood's men had discovered her flight sooner than expected. Panic seized her as she urged Buttercup into a gallop, but the old mare was no match for their fresh horses. They caught her at Devil's Wash, where the seasonal floods had carved deep channels in the earth. Rough hands dragged her from the saddle, and she fought like a wildcat, scratching and biting until someone backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded in her vision as she fell to the rocky ground. "Thought you could run from Mr. Blackwood, did you?" Jake Morrison, Blackwood's foreman, sneered as he grabbed her by the hair. "He don't take kindly to his property trying to escape." "I'm not his property." Clara spat blood from her split lip. Morrison laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You will become mourning, and he'll teach you proper respect for your husband." They were dragging her back toward their horses when it happened. A figure materialized from the shadows of the rocks, tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. In the moonlight, Clara caught a glimpse of long black hair, copper skin, and eyes that burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. The Apache warrior moved like death itself. His knife found Morrison's throat before the man could draw his gun. The other 2 men scrambled for their weapons, but arrows whispered from the darkness, finding their marks with deadly precision. In moments, it was over. 3 bodies lay still on the blood-soaked earth. Clara scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs as the warrior approached. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 summers, with sharp cheekbones and scars that spoke of battles survived. He wore traditional dress, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, and a bandana holding back his hair. A Winchester rifle was slung across his back. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in her torn dress, her bruised face, the desperation in her expression. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "You run from forced marriage." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, unable to find her voice. The warrior's gaze shifted to the dead men, then back to her. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who refused to be caged. "I am called Stormcrow in your tongue," he said. "These men would have taken you back to slavery worse than death." "Thank you," Clara whispered, the words inadequate for what he'd done. Stormcrow moved to check the bodies, retrieving arrows with practiced efficiency. Then he turned back to her, and his next words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the desert cold. "I'll save you from forced marriage with him," he said, his voice carrying the weight of mountains and ancient promises. "But in the end, you will be my wife." Before Clara could respond, he held out his hand. In the distance, she could hear more riders approaching. Blackwood wouldn't send just 3 men to retrieve his prize. She looked at the Apache warrior, this dangerous stranger who'd killed for her without hesitation, and made the second life-changing choice of the night. She took his hand. Stormcrow's hand was calloused and strong, pulling Clara to her feet with surprising gentleness. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like war drums. Without a word, he whistled low and sharp, and a painted Mustang emerged from the shadows, its coat a patchwork of black and white that seemed to blend with the moonlit landscape. "Your horse is too slow," he said, already moving to lift Clara onto his mount. She found herself seated in front of him, his arms secure around her waist as he guided the Mustang with his knees. Buttercup whinnied softly, and Stormcrow slapped her rump, sending the old mare galloping back toward town. She will find her way home. They rode hard through the night, following paths Clara couldn't see, through narrow passages between towering rocks where the stars formed a ribbon of light overhead. The Apache's presence behind her was both terrifying and oddly comforting. She could feel the controlled power in his movements, the absolute certainty with which he navigated the treacherous terrain. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, they finally slowed. Clara's body ached from the ride, her torn dress offering little protection against the morning chill. They had climbed high into the Dragoon Mountains, where ancient junipers twisted from the rocky soil and eagles circled on the thermals. Stormcrow dismounted first, then helped her down. Clara's legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand straight, meeting his intense gaze. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly, the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, the quiet strength in his bearing. "Why?" she asked, the question encompassing everything. Why save her? Why claim her? Why any of this? He was silent for a moment, checking his horse and scanning the horizon with the vigilance of one who lived always on guard. "Blackwood's men killed my sister 2 winters past," he said finally. "She was gathering herbs near the river. They took her, used her, left her body for the coyotes." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She'd heard whispers of such things, but had never known the victims had families who mourned, who sought justice in a land where the law served only those with white skin and deep pockets. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Stormcrow's jaw tightened. "Sorry changes nothing, but when I saw you fighting them, saw the fear in your eyes, the same fear I saw in Little Dove's." He trailed off, then looked at her directly. "No woman should be forced. Not by them, not by anyone." "Including you?" Clara challenged, finding her courage. "You said I would be your wife." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I said, in the end. The end is far from now. First, you must survive. Come." He led her to a concealed overhang in the rocks where a small spring bubbled from the earth, forming a pool no bigger than a washbasin. Clara fell to her knees and drank deeply, the cold water like a blessing on her parched throat. When she looked up, Stormcrow was laying out supplies from a hidden cache dried venison, corn cakes, a blanket woven with intricate patterns. "Eat," he commanded, handing her a portion. "We have far to go." As Clara ate, he taught her the first lessons of survival. He showed her how to read the signs of water in the landscape, the particular green of certain plants, the way birds flew at dawn, the smell of moisture on the wind. He demonstrated how to move silently across the rocky ground, where to place her feet to avoid loose stones that might betray their passage. "Your people make too much noise," he said, watching her practice. "You walk like you own the earth, but the earth owns us all." The sun climbed higher, turning the red rocks into a furnace. Stormcrow found shade beneath an outcropping and insisted they rest during the hottest part of the day. Clara huddled in the shadows, acutely aware of his presence just feet away. Despite everything, she didn't fear him, not the way she feared Blackwood. "Tell me about your sister," she said softly. Stormcrow was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Little Dove had 14 summers. She loved to sing morning songs, gathering songs, songs to make the children laugh. She was to marry Red Sky from the Northern Band. Our mother had already begun preparing the wedding gifts. His voice held a pain that transcended language. Culture, all the barriers between them. Clara understood loss. She'd held her mother's hand as fever took her, watched the light fade from eyes that had once danced with joy. "My mother died of the fever 4 years ago." She offered. She used to sing too, hymns mostly, but sometimes songs from her childhood in Ireland. She had the most beautiful voice. They sat in shared silence, two souls marked by grief, finding an unexpected moment of connection in their mutual loss. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they resumed their journey. Stormcrow taught her to find edible plants, prickly pear fruit, mesquite pods, the tender hearts of agave. He showed her how to make fire with a bow drill, though it took her many attempts before she produced even a wisp of smoke. "Patience," he said, steadying her trembling hands. "Fire comes to those who persist." On the second night, they camped in a hidden canyon where ancient paintings adorned the walls, spirals and human figures and animals that seemed to dance in the flickering firelight. Clara stared in wonder at the artwork, feeling the weight of ages past. "My people have walked these lands since before memory," Stormcrow said, following her gaze. Before your people came with their papers saying they own what cannot be owned. I never wanted to take anything from anyone, Clara said quietly. My father came west for a new start after the war. He fought for the Union, saw too much death. He thought the desert would be peaceful. Stormcrow snorted. No place is peaceful when men bring their wars with them. He was right. Clara knew. The violence followed wherever her people went, like a shadow that grew longer with each passing year. On the third day, as they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of trail, Clara's foot slipped on loose shale. She cried out as she fell, her ankle twisting beneath her. Stormcrow was beside her in an instant, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the injury. Not broken, he determined. But you cannot walk on it. He tore strips from his own shirt to bind her ankle, then lifted her onto his back without ceremony. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him as he carried her up the mountain path. The intimacy of it made her blush, but there was nothing improper in his touch, only the practical care of one human for another. That night, as he tended the fire and she elevated her injured foot, Clara found herself studying him in the dancing light. He was handsome in a way the town boys had never been, all sharp angles and fluid grace, with an intensity that made her heart race. "What is your true name?" she asked. "Stormcrow is what you're called in English, but what do your people call you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Names have power. To know someone's true name is to hold a piece of their spirit. "Then I won't ask again," Clara said, understanding the boundary she'd nearly crossed. But later, as she drifted toward sleep, she heard him whisper something in his own language, syllables that flowed like water over stone. She didn't know what they meant, but she treasured the sound, holding it close like a secret gift. The fourth morning brought new danger. Stormcrow woke her before dawn, his hand over her mouth, his body tense as a drawn bow. In the distance, she could hear them. Horses, dogs, the voices of men who hunted other men for sport and profit. Blackwood has hired trackers. Stormcrow breathed in her ear. Apache scouts who sell their skills to the highest bidder. Clara's heart sank. If other Apache were hunting them, their chances of escape dropped like stones in deep water. Stormcrow's face hardened into something fierce and dangerous. They chose their path. Now I must choose mine. He handed her his rifle, showing her quickly how to load and aim. "If something happens to me, you run, follow the stream down. It leads to Mexico. Find the mission at San Miguel. The sisters there will help you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Clara said fiercely, surprised by the strength of her own conviction. That ghost smile returned. "You have warrior's heart, Clara Bennett. Perhaps that is why the spirits brought us together." As the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold, they prepared to face whatever came next. Clara's ankles still throbbed, but she could walk now, and she'd learned more in 4 days with Stormcrow than in all her years in Cedar Ridge. She'd learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant adapting, persisting, finding strength you didn't know you possessed. And perhaps most dangerously, she'd learned that her heart could race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear when Stormcrow looked at her with those dark, intense eyes. The hunters were closing in, but Clara Bennett was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled into the desert. She was becoming something else, something harder and wilder, something that might just survive whatever trials lay ahead. The news traveled fast through Cedar Ridge, carried on the tongues of gossips like tumbleweeds before a storm. By the time the sun reached its zenith, everyone from the banker to the town drunk knew that Clara Bennett had been abducted by savages on the eve of her wedding to Harlan Blackwood, in the Copper Dollar Saloon. Men gathered around tables sticky with spilled whiskey, their voices growing louder with each retelling of the tale. 3 of Blackwood's best men, dead as stones, said Tom Garrett, the blacksmith. Throats cut ear to ear, arrows in their backs. Work of Apache, no doubt about it. That poor girl. "Mrs." Abigail Fletcher clutched her handkerchief, though her eyes gleamed with a thrill of scandal. "To think what those heathens might be doing to her. Death would be a mercy. Judge William Thornton, nursing his third whiskey of the morning, shook his grizzled head. Blackwood's offering $500 for her return. Says he'll honor his promise to marry her, despite her circumstances. The word hung in the air like a noose. Everyone understood what circumstances meant. A white woman taken by Indians was considered ruined, fit only for pity or scorn, never again for polite society. Meanwhile, Harlan Blackwood paced his study like a caged wolf, his face mottled with rage. The room reeked of cigars and barely controlled violence. He'd already broken 2 crystal decanters against the wall, and his house staff cowered in the hallways, afraid to enter. "She's mine," he snarled at his foreman, Pete Daniels, who'd replaced the late Jake Morrison. "Bought and paid for, no Apache bastard is going to steal what belongs to me." Daniels, a scarred veteran of the Indian Wars, chose his words carefully. "The scouts say they're heading into Apache territory. Mr. Blackwood, that's dangerous ground, even with a full company." "Then hire more guns," Blackwood snapped. "I don't care if you have to empty every saloon from here to Tombstone. I want 20 men, 30 if you can find them, and double the bounty. $1,000 for whoever brings her back." "What about the Apache?" Blackwood's smile was cold as a desert night. "Kill him. Slowly. Make sure she watches." Far from the poisonous whispers of Cedar Ridge, Clara and Stormcrow reached a sheltered valley where a small spring fed a grove of cottonwoods. Her ankle had healed enough to walk without severe pain, though Stormcrow still insisted on checking it each evening. His touch clinical, yet somehow intimate. They had evaded the trackers for now, using every trick Stormcrow knew: false trails, backtracking, walking in streams to hide their scent. But both knew it was only a matter of time before they were found again. "We cannot keep running like rabbits," Stormcrow said as they rested in the shade. "Soon I must take you to my people." Clara's stomach tightened. "Your people who will hate me for my white skin?" "Some will," he admitted. "But my grandmother is wise. She will see your spirit, not just your face." That night, as they shared a meager meal of roasted agave hearts and the last of the dried meat, Stormcrow spoke of his childhood. His father had been killed in a cavalry raid when he was 7 summers old. His mother had raised him and Little Dove alone, teaching them the old ways even as their world shrank with each passing season. "The whites call us savage," he said, staring into the fire. "But I have seen their savagery. They kill for gold, for land, for the pleasure of killing. We kill to survive. Not all whites are like Blackwood." Clara protested, though even as she spoke, she wondered if it were true. How many in Cedar Ridge would shelter an Apache fleeing injustice? How many would offer water to his children? Stormcrow studied her across the flames. "No, not all. You fight against your own kind's cruelty. This is why you are here." The next morning brought a new complication. As they prepared to leave their camp, Stormcrow suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his knife. 3 Apache warriors emerged from the rocks, moving with the same fluid grace Clara had come to associate with Stormcrow. They spoke rapidly in their language, gestures sharp with anger. Clara caught her own name, or what sounded like it, and Blackwood, amidst the unfamiliar words. One warrior, his face painted with red ochre, gestured violently toward her. Stormcrow responded with equal fervor, positioning himself between Clara and the other men. The argument escalated, voices rising like the desert heat. Finally, the eldest of the 3, a man with silver threading through his long hair, raised his hand for silence. He studied Clara with eyes that seemed to see through her skin to her very bones. When he spoke again, his tone was measured, thoughtful. Stormcrow translated, his voice tight. "This is Spotted Eagle, my mother's brother. He says you bring danger to all Apache, that Blackwood's men will burn our camps, kill our children, seeking you." "Then let me go," Clara said, though the words cut her throat like glass. "I won't have innocent blood on my hands." Spotted Eagle understood enough English to snort at this. He spoke again, and Stormcrow's translation carried bitter amusement. He says white people's hands are already so covered in innocent blood. What difference would a little more make? The warrior with the painted face spat at Clara's feet. Stormcrow's hand moved to his knife, but Spotted Eagle intervened, speaking sharply to both younger men. After more heated discussion, the three warriors melted back into the landscape as suddenly as they'd appeared. "What did he decide?" Clara asked. "You will be brought before the council," Stormcrow said. "They will judge whether you stay or go, and if they decide I should go," his jaw tightened, "then I will have choices to make." They traveled deeper into the mountains, following paths that seemed to exist more in Stormcrow's memory than in any visible form. The landscape grew harsher, more beautiful red rock spires reaching toward skies so blue it hurt to look at, hidden valleys where deer grazed on sweet grass, ancient ruins that spoke of peoples long vanished. On their 6th day together, they stopped at a sacred spring where Stormcrow insisted they both cleanse themselves before entering his people's territory. Clara washed in the cold water, acutely aware of her torn, filthy dress, her sunburned skin, her tangled hair. She looked nothing like the proper young lady who'd fled Cedar Ridge less than a week ago. When she emerged from behind the screening rocks, she found Stormcrow had left new clothing for her, a simple dress of soft doeskin, leggings, and moccasins. The garments smelled of sage and smoke, and wearing them felt like shedding an old skin. Stormcrow's eyes widened when he saw her, something flickering in their depths that made her pulse quicken. "Now you look less like prey," he said, but his voice carried undertones that had nothing to do with survival. As they neared the Apache camp, Clara's courage began to falter. She could smell smoke from cooking fires, hear the sound of voices, children laughing, normal sounds of life that somehow terrified her more than all the dangers they'd faced. "What if they're right?" she whispered. "What if I do bring death to your people?" Stormcrow stopped, turning to face her fully. "Death comes whether we invite it or not, but you—" He reached out, his fingers barely brushing a strand of her hair. "You might bring life, change, a bridge between worlds that seem destined to destroy each other." "That's a lot to put on one person," Clara said, her voice shaky. "Yes," he agreed. "But I have watched you these days. You are stronger than you know. Your spirit is like the desert plants that survive with little water. It bends, but does not break." The camp appeared gradually, wiki-ups blending so perfectly with the landscape that Clara didn't see them until they were nearly upon them. Women working at their tasks looked up, conversations dying as they saw Stormcrow returning with a white woman. Children who'd been playing moments before pressed against their mothers' skirts, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. An elderly woman emerged from the largest dwelling, her face a map of years and wisdom. She wore a dress decorated with elk teeth and silver coins, her gray hair bound in the traditional way. This, Clara knew instinctively, was Stormcrow's grandmother. The old woman spoke, her voice carrying the authority of mountains. Stormcrow responded respectfully, and Clara caught her own name woven into the Apache words. His grandmother approached, circling Clara slowly, examining her from every angle. Clara stood still, fighting the urge to fidget under that penetrating gaze. Finally, the woman reached out and touched Clara's face, her fingers gentle despite their gnarled appearance. She spoke again, and Stormcrow translated. "She says you have eyes that have seen sorrow, that suffering has marked you, but not broken you. She will speak for you at the council, but you must prove yourself worthy of her words." "How?" Clara asked. The old woman smiled, an expression both kind and challenging. "Through Stormcrow," she said, "by becoming one of us, by learning our ways, by showing that your heart is true, not just your words." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and honey, Clara found herself at another crossroads. Behind her lay the world she'd known, cruel in its certainties, suffocating in its expectations. Before her lay the unknown, a people who had every reason to hate her, a way of life as foreign as the moon. And beside her stood Stormcrow, this warrior who'd saved her life and claimed her future in the same breath. She still didn't fully understand what he wanted from her, what his declaration about marriage truly meant. But she understood this. Among his people, she would have to earn her place, prove her worth. In Cedar Ridge, she'd been property to be traded. Here, she might become something else entirely. If she survived the becoming, the Apache camp stirred with Clara's presence like a disturbed anthill. Women whispered behind their hands as she passed, their dark eyes following her every movement. Children darted between the wickiups, brave enough to stare but too frightened to approach. The warriors watched with open hostility, particularly a young man named Black Wolf, whose scarred face twisted with contempt whenever he saw her. Stormcrow's grandmother, who Clara learned was called Singing River, had given her shelter in a small wickiup at the edge of camp. It was sparse but clean, with blankets woven in intricate patterns and baskets filled with dried herbs that perfumed the air with sage and cedar. "You sleep here," Stormcrow had said that first night, his formal tone a sharp contrast to the growing familiarity of their journey. "Tomorrow, you begin to learn." The learning was harder than anything Clara had experienced. Each dawn, Singing River woke her before the sun touched the eastern peaks. The old woman spoke no English, communicating through gestures and repetition, her patience wearing thin when Clara fumbled with tasks that Apache girls mastered in childhood. Clara learned to grind mesquite pods into flour, her hands blistering from the stone mano and metate. She learned to scrape hide until it was soft as silk, though her first attempts resulted in holes that earned disapproving clicks from the watching women. She learned to identify plants for food and medicine, to weave baskets that wouldn't hold water no matter how tightly she pulled the coils. "Your hands are like a baby's," laughed a woman named Blue Heron, one of the few who showed her any kindness. "Soft and useless, but they will learn, if your spirit is willing." The hardest lessons came from the children. They mocked her clumsy Apache words, giggled when she confused similar-sounding phrases. Once, attempting to ask for water, she accidentally propositioned a mortified elder, sending the entire camp into fits of laughter that echoed off the canyon walls. But Clara persisted. She woke each day with fresh determination, driven by something deeper than survival. Perhaps it was the memory of Stormcrow's words about building bridges. Perhaps it was her own stubborn pride. Or perhaps it was the way Stormcrow watched her from a distance, his eyes holding an approval he wouldn't voice aloud. He kept his distance during those first weeks, bound by propriety and his people's customs. But sometimes, in the evening when the camp settled around their fires, he would appear at the edge of her firelight. "You are learning," he would say, and those simple words warmed her more than the flames. "I'm trying," Clara would reply, showing him her blistered hands, the burns from the cooking fires, the scratches from gathering thorny plants. "Trying is the beginning of becoming," he said one night, and something in his voice made her shiver despite the warmth. The hostility from others grew sharper as days passed. Black Wolf, she learned, had lost his father and brothers to white soldiers. His hatred burned hot as the desert sun, and he took every opportunity to remind others of her origins. "She brings death," he proclaimed loudly whenever Stormcrow wasn't present. "The white men search for her. When they come, they will kill us all for harboring their woman." His words found fertile ground in hearts already poisoned by loss. Clara felt the weight of their stares, heard the conversations that stopped when she approached. Some women pulled their children away when she passed, as if her white skin carried disease. One afternoon, as Clara struggled to help Blue Heron repair a wickiup covering, a commotion arose from the camp's eastern edge. Scouts had returned, their faces grim with news. Stormcrow strode past, his expression dark as gathering thunderclouds. "What is it?" Clara asked Blue Heron. The woman's face had paled. "White soldiers, many of them. They make camp at Willow Springs, only half a day's ride from here." Clara's heart sank. Blackwood's influence had reached even here, into the heart of Apache territory. That night, the council gathered, and though women weren't permitted to attend, Clara could hear the raised voices, the anger and fear that rippled through the camp like a flash flood. Stormcrow found her later, sitting alone by her small fire. His face was drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, a conflict that pulled at the corners of his mouth. "The council argues," he said without preamble. "Many say you must go, that your presence endangers every child, every elder who cannot run." "They're right," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "I should never have come here. Let me go. Stormcrow, I'll lead them away." His hand shot out, grasping her wrist with gentle firmness. "You would not survive a day. Blackwood's men would take you, and then they would come here anyway, seeking revenge for their dead. Then what do I do?" The desperation in her voice made him tighten his grip. "You become one of us truly. Tomorrow, Singing River will speak for you before the council, but words alone won't be enough." He released her wrist, his fingers trailing fire across her skin. "You must show them your heart." The next morning, Clara woke to find Singing River standing over her, holding a dress unlike any she'd seen in the camp. It was white doeskin, decorated with elaborate beadwork, fringe that would dance with every movement. Through gestures and the few Apache words Clara had learned, the old woman communicated her intent. This was a ceremonial dress, worn for important occasions. Today, Clara would stand before the council not as a white refugee, but as someone seeking to become Apache. The council gathered in a natural amphitheater of red rock, the morning sun casting long shadows across the gathered faces. Clara saw Stormcrow among the warriors, his face carefully neutral. Black Wolf stood opposite, his scarred features twisted with anticipation of her rejection. Singing River spoke first, her aged voice carrying surprising power. Though Clara couldn't understand all the words, she recognized some strong spirit, willing heart, bridge between worlds. The old woman gestured to Clara's blistered hands, the healing burns on her arms, evidence of her efforts to learn their ways. Then Black Wolf rose, his words falling like hammer blows. He spoke of massacres, of villages burned, of children shot for sport by soldiers. He pointed at Clara, and she didn't need translation to understand his message. She was the enemy, would always be the enemy, regardless of what clothes she wore or words she learned. Others spoke, some for, many against. The sun climbed higher, and Clara's legs trembled from standing so long, but she remained upright, meeting every gaze that challenged her. Finally, the chief, a man called Standing Bear, raised his hand for silence. He studied Clara with eyes that had seen too many seasons of sorrow, too many broken promises from her people. "You seek to be one of us," he said in accented English, surprising her. "But words are wind, actions are stone. What stone will you show us?" Clara's mind raced. What could she offer these people who had lost so much to her kind? What bridge could she build across a chasm carved by blood and betrayal? Then she remembered her mother's locket, hidden in the small pouch at her waist. With trembling fingers, she withdrew it, the last link to her old life. The only valuable thing she owned. The silver caught the sunlight, and several people murmured at its beauty. "This was my mother's," Clara said, her voice carrying across the natural amphitheater. "She brought it from Ireland, from her mother before her. It's all I have left of her, of my old life." She walked forward, knelt before Standing Bear, and placed the locket in his weathered hands. "I give this freely, not as payment, but as a promise. My old life is dead. If you accept me, I will defend your children as my own. Share your hunger in lean times, mourn your dead and celebrate your joys. I cannot undo what my people have done, but I can choose to be different. I can choose to be a bridge instead of a wall." The silence stretched like a held breath. Standing Bear opened the locket, studying the faded photograph of Clara's mother within. When he looked up, his eyes held a depth of understanding that made Clara's throat tight. He spoke in Apache, his words measured and final. Stormcrow translated, his voice betraying his relief. "You may stay, but you are not yet fully accepted. You must prove yourself through the changing of seasons. If you remain when the snows come, if you share our hardships without complaint, then we will speak of belonging." It wasn't full acceptance, But it was enough. Clara bowed her head, tears of relief falling onto the red earth. As the council dispersed, Black Wolf shouldered past her, his words a harsh whisper. You may fool old women and lovesick warriors, but I see what you are. When the soldiers come, and they will come, we will see where your true loyalty lies. Storm Crow appeared at her elbow, guiding her away from the confrontation. You did well, he said quietly. Singing River is proud. And you? Clara asked, looking up at him. Are you proud? Something flickered in his dark eyes. Pride, yes, but also something warmer, more dangerous. I am pleased, he said carefully. But Black Wolf speaks truth in one thing. The soldiers will come, and when they do, choices will be made that cannot be unmade. That night, as Clara lay in her wickiup listening to the camp settling into sleep, she thought about bridges. They could unite, but they could also burn. And somewhere in the darkness, she knew Blackwood's men were planning to light the flames that would test every promise she'd made. The season was turning, the days growing shorter. Soon the snows would come, and with them, the trial that would determine whether Clara Bennett could truly die and be reborn as something new, something that belonged to neither world fully, but might somehow help both survive. The attack came with the first frost of autumn, when the aspen leaves had turned to gold and the morning air bit sharp as broken glass. Clara woke to the thunder of hoofbeats and the screams of women grabbing their children, warriors rushing for weapons. Blackwood had not merely hired soldiers, he had assembled a small army. 30 men, armed with repeating rifles and hatred, descended upon the Apache camp like locusts. At their head rode Blackwood himself, his gray eyes cold as winter steel, accompanied by a man Clara recognized with a sickening dread, Colonel James Morrison, the butcher of Sand Creek, whose reputation for brutality against natives was legendary even among those who condoned such violence. Find the white woman, Blackwood's voice carried across the chaos. Burn everything else. Clara stumbled from her wickiup to see horror unfolding. The attackers had struck the horse herd first, scattering the animals to prevent escape. Now they advanced on the camp proper, rifles cracking in the crisp morning air. An elder named Broken Arrow fell first, red blooming across his chest as he tried to shield his grandson. Storm Crow appeared through the smoke, his rifle speaking death to 2 attackers before they knew he was there. Run, he shouted to Clara. To the caves! But Clara couldn't move. Across the camp, she saw Blue Heron fall, trying to protect her daughter. The child's scream cut through Clara's paralysis like a blade. Without thinking, she ran toward them, scooping the little girl into her arms just as a soldier's rifle swung toward them. The shot never came. Black Wolf, who had shown her nothing but hatred, threw himself between them and the bullet meant for her. He crumpled to the earth, blood spreading beneath him, but his eyes found hers in his final moment. In them, she saw not accusation, but acceptance, perhaps even respect. Go, he gasped, and Clara ran. The child clutched to her chest. The caves Storm Crow had mentioned were a network of passages in the canyon walls, known only to the Apache. Women and children fled there while warriors fought a desperate rearguard action. Clara helped herd the young ones into the darkness, her white skin making her visible to the attackers but also confusing them. Several hesitated to shoot at what appeared to be a white woman, but there was no safety in the caves. Morrison's men had Apache scouts, traders who knew the hiding places. They began smoking out the refugees, forcing them back into the open. It was then that Clara made her choice. She emerged from the caves alone, hands raised, walking directly toward the line of soldiers. Behind her, she could hear Storm Crow shouting her name, but she didn't turn. Her appearance caused a ripple of confusion among the attackers. Here was their prize, walking freely toward them. Blackwood dismounted, his face a mask of possessive fury. Clara, my dear, you've led us quite a chase. Let them go, Clara said, her voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. You came for me. You have me. Let the others leave in peace. Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Apache don't get peace, girl. They get what they deserve. Then you'll have to kill me too, Clara said, stepping between the soldiers and the caves. Because I won't leave with you while you slaughter innocents. Blackwood's face darkened. You've been ruined by these savages, but no matter. I'll beat the wildness out of you once we're married. I'll die first. That can be arranged, Morrison drawled. But Blackwood raised a hand. No, she's mine. He nodded to his men. Take her. As soldiers moved forward, the Apache warriors struck. Stormcrow led them, fighting with desperate fury. The battle became a whirlwind of gunfire and war cries, dust and blood. Clara found herself grabbed by rough hands, dragged toward Blackwood's horse. Through the melee, she saw Singing River emerge from her wickiup, not fleeing but walking calmly toward them. The old woman held something in her hands, a ceremonial staff decorated with eagle feathers. She raised it high and spoke in a voice that somehow cut through the battle's noise. Even Morrison's Apache scouts stepped back, fear replacing arrogance on their faces. Singing River continued her chant, and Clara felt the hair on her neck rise. This was power older than bullets, older than the hatred between peoples. One of the turncoat scouts babbled to Morrison in broken English. Medicine woman, very powerful. Curse on any who spill blood here. Morrison laughed, raising his rifle toward the old woman. Superstitious nonsense. The shot echoed off the canyon walls. Singing River crumpled, the ceremonial staff falling from her hands. But as she fell, she looked directly at Morrison and spoke a single word that made even hardened killers step back. Stormcrow's anguished cry tore through the air. He fought like a man possessed, cutting through soldiers to reach his grandmother. Clara used the distraction to break free, grabbing a fallen soldier's pistol. "Stop!" she screamed, firing into the air. "Stop this madness!" For a moment, the battlefield stilled. Clara stood between the two forces, the pistol steady in her hand. "Colonel Morrison, you've committed murder. These people were protecting me by their own choice. I wasn't kidnapped. I fled an unwanted marriage. Any court would—" "No court cares what happens to Indians," Morrison cut her off. "Or to white women who lay with them. Then you leave me no choice." Clara turned the pistol toward her own temple. "I'll die before I let you use me as an excuse for more killing." Blackwood's face went white. "Clara, don't be foolish. Put the gun down. Order your men to withdraw, now, or my death will be on your hands, Harlan, and everyone will know it." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Stormcrow watched her with eyes that burned, but he understood her strategy. Blackwood wanted her alive. His pride demanded he possess what he considered his property. "You're bluffing," Blackwood said, but uncertainty colored his voice. Clara cocked the hammer. "I watched my mother die slowly of fever. I've seen what men like you do to women who can't fight back. Death holds no terror for me anymore." "Colonel," one of Blackwood's hired guns muttered, "maybe we should." "Silence," Morrison barked. But Clara could see the calculation in his eyes. A dead white woman, even one who'd gone native, would bring questions, investigations. His reputation was already stained. He couldn't afford more scrutiny. It was Blackwood who broke first. "Lower your weapons," he ordered his men. When Morrison protested, Blackwood rounded on him. "She's no good to me dead. Colonel, we'll find another way." Reluctantly, the soldiers began to withdraw, but Morrison had one more card to play. As he mounted his horse, he called out in Apache, "We'll be back. The army knows where you are now. You have 1 moon to surrender the woman, or we'll return with the full cavalry." As the attackers disappeared into the desert, Clara's legs gave out. The pistol fell from nerveless fingers as Stormcrow caught her, holding her against his chest. "You brave fool," he whispered fiercely. "You beautiful, brave fool." Around them, the camp counted their dead, 5 warriors, including Black Wolf, 3 elders, including Singing River, 2 women, and a child whose name Clara would never forget. Little Star, who'd been caught by a stray bullet. The keening of the mourners rose with the smoke from burning wickiups. Clara wept with them, her tears falling on earth already soaked with blood. She had tried to be a bridge, but bridges could be burned from either side. Stormcrow lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. This was not your fault, wasn't it? They came because of me. They would have come anyway. Eventually. It is their way. His voice hardened. But now we have choices to make. Morrison spoke truth. They will return with more soldiers than we can fight. Standing Bear, wounded but still commanding, gathered the survivors. His words were heavy with the weight of leadership. We cannot stay. We must flee deeper into the mountains, perhaps to Mexico. But first, he looked at Clara. The council must decide about the white woman. Clara straightened, ready to face their judgment. She had proven herself in battle, but she had also brought death to their door. Whatever they decided, she would accept it. But it was Stormcrow who spoke first, his voice ringing with conviction. She stood between bullets and our children. She offered her life for ours. Black Wolf saw this at the end, saw her true heart. If we send her away now, we dishonor his sacrifice and all who died today. One by one, the survivors spoke. Blue Heron's sister, cradling the daughter Clara had saved. A warrior who'd seen Clara tend the wounded even as bullets flew. Even some who had opposed her presence admitted that she had proven herself in the crucible of battle. When the voices fell silent, Standing Bear rendered his judgment. Clara Bennett died today with our fallen. In her place stands White Dove, daughter of the Apache, sister to our grief, bound to us by blood spilled and blood saved. Stormcrow translated. And Clara, now White Dove, felt something fundamental shift inside her. The bridge hadn't burned after all. It had been forged in fire, made stronger by the flames that had tried to destroy it. But even as the people prepared for their flight into exile, Clara knew this was not the end. Blackwood would not give up. The army would not forget. And somewhere in the vast desert, a reckoning waited that would test every bond forged in blood and tears. Stormcrow took her hand as they prepared to flee into the uncertain darkness. My vow stands, he said quietly. But now you understand what it truly means to be my wife. To be Apache, it means exile, hardship, perhaps death. Clara, White Dove, squeezed his hand in return. Then we face it together. As your people say, I have chosen my path. The moon rose blood red over the abandoned camp, and the survivors melted into the night, carrying their dead and their determination to survive. Behind them, the ashes of their homes cooled in the desert wind. But ahead lay the promise of mountains that might yet shelter love born from tragedy. The flight into the deep wilderness tested every lesson Clara had learned. They moved only at night, following ancient paths known to few, carrying their wounded on makeshift travois. By day, they hid in caves and narrow canyons, posting guards while the injured tried to rest. The autumn cold bit deep, and food grew scarce as they left their traditional hunting grounds behind. Stormcrow had taken a bullet in his shoulder during the battle, though he'd hidden it until they were miles from the burning camp. Clara discovered it when she saw blood seeping through his shirt as he lifted a water skin. You fool, she whispered fiercely, pulling him aside from the others. Why didn't you say something? We had to keep moving, he replied through gritted teeth. The wound is not deep, but infection had already set in. By the third night of their flight, fever consumed him. Standing Bear called a halt in a sheltered valley where a small spring bubbled from the rocks. While the band made temporary camp, Clara fought for Stormcrow's life. She used every skill Singing River had taught her, creating poultices from desert plants, brewing willow bark tea to bring down his fever. For 2 days and nights, she never left his side, bathing his burning skin with cool water, forcing medicine between his cracked lips. In his delirium, Stormcrow spoke in a mixture of Apache and English, reliving the raid that killed his father, calling for Little Dove, reaching for enemies only he could see. Sometimes he gripped Clara's hand with desperate strength, his eyes focusing on her face with startling clarity. White Dove, he whispered during one such moment. My White Dove who brings storm clouds. Rest, she urged, smoothing his hair back from his burning forehead. "Save your strength. Must tell you, before—" His voice faded, but his eyes remained locked on hers. "The marriage vow, not just words. Among my people, it is sacred bond. But I would not force. You must choose freely." "Shh," Clara said, tears blurring her vision. "We'll speak of this when you're well." "Promise me," he insisted with surprising strength. "If I die, you go back, find safety with your people." "You're not going to die," Clara said fiercely. "I won't let you, and I'll never go back to being property, to being less than human. My place is here, whether you live or—" She couldn't finish the sentence. On the third night, his fever broke. Clara wept with relief as his breathing eased and natural sleep replaced the restless delirium. When he woke properly the next morning, his eyes were clear, focused on her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "You stayed," he said simply. "Where else would I go?" Clara replied, trying for lightness despite her exhaustion. "I'm Apache now, remember? White dove, daughter of the people." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. "Yes," he said softly. "You are." As Storm Crow recovered, the band continued their desperate journey south. They were down to 30 souls, warriors, women, children, elders who refused to be left behind. Each day brought new hardships. Water sources were few and far between. Game was scarce in these unfamiliar lands. The children cried from hunger, and the wounded grew weaker despite Clara's best efforts. It was during a rest in a box canyon that the scouts brought dire news. Blue Heron's husband, Running Wolf, returned from a reconnaissance with his face grim. "Soldiers," he reported to Standing Bear. "2 days behind us. Many of them, maybe 50. They follow our trail like wolves after wounded deer." The people exchanged looks of despair. They could not outrun mounted soldiers, not with wounded and children. Some of the warriors spoke of making a final stand, dying with honor rather than being hunted like animals. It was Clara who proposed a desperate alternative. "Let me go to them," she said, standing in the council circle. "I'll tell them I escaped, that I've been trying to find my way back to civilization. I'll lead them away from your trail." Stormcrow, still weak but growing stronger, immediately protested. "They will not believe you, and Blackwood wants me alive." Clara interrupted. "He won't kill me, at least not immediately. It might buy you time to reach Mexico." "No." Stormcrow's voice was flat, final. "I did not save you from one cage to let you walk into another. And I won't let more people die for me," Clara shot back. "How many more children must we bury? How many more mothers must keen over their sons?" Standing Bear raised his hand for silence. The chief looked older than his years, worn by leadership in impossible times. "There is another way," he said slowly, "but it requires great sacrifice from all." He outlined his plan. The band would split. The wounded, elderly, and children would continue south with most of the women, led by trusted warriors who knew the hidden ways. Meanwhile, a smaller group would create false trails, leading the soldiers on a chase through the harsh badlands where horses would struggle and men would suffer. "I will lead this group," Standing Bear announced. "We need volunteers who can move fast, shoot straight, and—" He paused, his eyes finding Clara. "Who might convince the soldiers they chase the right quarry." Clara understood immediately. "I'll go. As will I," Stormcrow said, struggling to his feet despite his wound. "You can barely ride," Clara protested. "I can ride well enough to protect what is mine," he replied, and something in his tone made her arguments die unspoken. In the end, 12 chose to play decoy 8 warriors, 2 women who refused to leave their husbands, Stormcrow and Clara. They took the best horses, the most ammunition, and enough supplies for a week. At dawn, the 2 groups would part, perhaps forever. The night before separation, the band held a ceremony. There was no time for proper rituals, but Standing Bear spoke words over those who might not survive, commending their spirits to the mountain spirits. Clara found herself included in the blessings, Apache words flowing over her like water. Stormcrow found her afterward, sitting alone by a small fire. He moved stiffly, his wound still healing, but his presence was solid, comforting. "You could go with the others," he said. "You've proven yourself. No one would think less of you." Clara looked up at him, this warrior who'd saved her from one life and given her another. "Would you think less of me?" "No," he admitted. "But I would spend every moment until we met again fearing for you. Then you understand how I feel watching you ride to battle while wounded." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold night air. "White Dove," he said, using her Apache name with gentle emphasis. "What do you want? Not what honor demands, not what others expect. What does your heart tell you?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire dance. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "My heart tells me that I've found where I belong, not just with the people, but—" She turned to meet his eyes. "With you, if you'll have me, not as property or prize, but as a partner, equal in all things." Stormcrow's hand found hers, calloused fingers interlacing with her own. "Among my people, marriage is not taken lightly. It binds souls across this world and the next. But yes, White Dove, I would have you as my equal, my partner, my wife. If we survive what comes tomorrow." "When?" Clara corrected firmly. "When we survive." They sealed their promise not with elaborate ceremony, but with a simple kiss under the stars, witnessed by the eternal mountains and the spirit of those who had gone before. Dawn came too soon. The band divided with tears and embraces, not knowing who would live to meet again. Clara mounted a painted mare, her rifle across her saddle, her heart heavy but determined. Stormcrow rode beside her despite his wound, and she drew strength from his presence. As the decoy group rode north, deliberately leaving clear tracks, Clara looked back once at the dust cloud marking the passage of their people toward hoped-for safety. Then she faced forward, toward the danger they courted, the soldiers they must lead astray. "Ready, wife?" Stormcrow asked, a slight smile playing at his lips despite the gravity of their situation. "Ready, husband," Clara replied, tasting the foreign word, finding it sweet despite the bitter circumstances. They rode hard through the morning, laying false trails, doubling back, creating the illusion of a larger group. By afternoon, they could see the dust of their pursuers, closing steadily despite their tricks. Standing Bear called a halt on a ridge overlooking a maze of canyons. "Here we make them work for every mile," he announced. "Use the land against them. Make them pay in sweat and blood for every step." The warriors nodded, checking their weapons. Clara met Stormcrow's eyes across the gathered fighters. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Apache and white woman no longer, but something new, forged in flight and desperation and love. The sun beat down mercilessly as they prepared their ambush. In the distance, the dust cloud grew larger. Soon, very soon, the hunting would begin in earnest. But for this moment, Clara felt a strange peace. She had chosen her path with eyes wide open. She was White Dove, and she would fly free or die trying. The cat-and-mouse game through the Badlands lasted 5 grueling days. Standing Bear proved a master tactician, using every fold of land, every narrow defile to slow their pursuers. The decoy group would strike from ambush, firing a few shots before melting away like smoke. They poisoned waterholes with bitter herbs that wouldn't kill but would sicken both horses and men. They triggered small rock slides to block passages, forcing the soldiers to find alternate routes through the maze of stone. But the cost was mounting. 2 warriors fell to sniper fire. Running Fox's wife took a bullet meant for Clara, dying with a smile as she whispered, "Sister, live free for all of us." Each loss cut deep, but they couldn't stop to properly mourn. On the 6th day, everything changed. Clara and Stormcrow were scouting ahead when they spotted riders approaching from the east, not soldiers, but civilians. Her heart sank as she recognized the lead figure, Harlan Blackwood himself, accompanied by hired guns and what looked like a federal marshal. "He's cut off our escape route," Stormcrow observed grimly. "Now we're caught between 2 forces." They rushed back to warn Standing Bear, but found the situation had worsened. The main force of soldiers had used the night to circle around, positioning themselves to drive the Apache band into Blackwood's waiting arms. "It's a trap," Standing Bear said quietly. "They've been herding us like cattle to the slaughter." The survivors gathered in a natural bowl of red rock. Exhaustion etched on every face. They were down to 8 fighters, plus Clara. Ammunition was running low. The horses were spent, and now they were surrounded. "We make our stand here," Standing Bear announced. "Die as warriors, not hunted animals." But Clara had seen something the others hadn't. A flash of white fabric from Blackwood's group. A flag of truce. "Wait," she said. "They want a parley." Stormcrow's face darkened. "A trick. Maybe, but what choice do we have?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "Let me go. See what they want." "Absolutely not. I'm going." Clara's voice brooked no argument. "This started with me. Let me try to end it without more bloodshed." After heated debate, Standing Bear agreed, but only if Stormcrow accompanied her. Together, they rode out under a white cloth tied to a rifle barrel, meeting Blackwood's delegation halfway. Up close, Clara could see how the chase had affected her former fiancé. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his face gaunt with obsession. Beside him sat Marshal Thomas Bradley, a man known for his strict adherence to law and his unusual fairness, even toward Indians. "Clara," Blackwood's voice was hoarse. "My dear, look at you. What have these savages done? You're dressed like one of them, thin as a rail, and—" His eyes narrowed as he noticed how her hand rested on Stormcrow's arm. "You've been contaminated by them?" "Mr. Blackwood," Marshal Bradley interrupted, his tone professional. "Let's keep to the matter at hand." He turned to Clara. "Miss Bennett, I'm here to ensure your safe return to civilization. Your father has been beside himself with worry." Clara's heart lurched. "My father, but he was dying. The doctor from Tucson arrived just after you left," Blackwood said, his smile cold. "I paid for his treatment, as promised. Your father lives, Clara, and he wants his daughter back." The words hit Clara like physical blows. Her father lived. The knowledge changed everything and nothing. She felt Stormcrow tense beside her, understanding the weapon Blackwood had just deployed. "What are your terms?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Simple," Blackwood replied. "You come with us, now. The Apache can go free. I'll call off the soldiers. All I want is what's mine. I'm not yours," Clara said firmly. "I never was." "The law says otherwise." Marshal Bradley interjected, though he looked uncomfortable. "Your father signed a marriage contract. It's legally binding. Even if the bride was unwilling. The law assumes a father knows what's best for his daughter." The marshal replied, "I don't make the rules, miss, I just enforce them." Stormcrow spoke for the first time, his English carefully precise. "What guarantee do we have that you'll honor this bargain?" Blackwood's face twisted with disgust. "I don't make deals with animals." "But I do," Marshal Bradley said firmly. "If Miss Bennett comes willingly, I'll personally ensure the Apache are allowed to leave unharmed. You have my word as a federal officer." Clara looked between the two groups, her past and her present, the life she'd fled and the one she'd chosen. In the distance, she could see the soldiers positioning themselves for attack. One word from her could save the remaining Apache, including the man she'd come to love. "I need to speak with my husband," she said clearly. The word hit Blackwood like a slap. "Your what?" "Stormcrow is my husband by Apache law," Clara stated. "We were married 6 nights ago." Blackwood's face went from red to purple. "Apache law? Their barbaric rituals mean nothing. You're mine, Clara, mine." "Mr. Blackwood, control yourself," Marshal Bradley warned. He studied Clara with sharp eyes. "Miss Bennett or Mrs. White Dove," Clara supplied. "My name is White Dove now. Ma'am, are you saying you married this man of your own free will? You weren't forced or coerced?" "I chose him freely." Clara said, meeting the marshal's gaze. As I chose this life, I'm not a captive. I'm Apache. The silence stretched taut. Then Blackwood exploded. You lying witch! You've shared my bed. I've never even been alone with you. Clara cut him off, her voice like ice. You bought me like cattle from my desperate father. Whatever fantasies you've nursed about ownership, they were only ever in your mind. Blackwood went for his gun, but Stormcrow was faster. In one fluid motion, he put himself between Clara and Blackwood, his own weapon drawn. Marshal Bradley also had his pistol out, pointed at Blackwood. Stand down, Mr. Blackwood, the marshal ordered. Nobody's shooting anybody on my watch. You heard her, Blackwood snarled. She's gone native, married to a savage. She's no better than a... Careful, Stormcrow warned, his voice deadly quiet. Choose your next words very carefully. Marshal Bradley holstered his weapon slowly. Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. White Dove. You're coming back to town with us. There'll be a proper hearing before Judge Thompson. If you can prove your marriage predates the contract your father signed, and that you entered it willingly, then you're free. The Apache can go. And if the judge rules against her, Stormcrow asked. The marshal's face was grim. Then the contract stands, and she belongs to Mr. Blackwood. No court will recognize a heathen marriage, Blackwood spat. That's for Judge Thompson to decide, Bradley said firmly. It's this or bloodshed. Your choice, ma'am. Clara felt the weight of lives in her hands. Standing Bear and the others were prepared to die fighting. But how many soldiers would also fall? How many sons wouldn't return home? And what of the larger band? Fleeing south with the children? If the fighting continued, the army would never stop hunting them. If I come, she said slowly, you'll call off the pursuit? All of it? Let both groups of Apache reach Mexico safely. Marshal Bradley nodded. I'll need to verify there are two groups. But yet, if you come peacefully, testify truthfully, and abide by the judge's decision, I'll personally ensure safe passage for the Apache to the border. Clara, no, Stormcrow said in Apache. It's a trap. They'll never let you go. Maybe not, she replied in the same language. But if there's a chance to save our people, I have to take it. She turned back to the marshal. I accept your terms, but I have conditions. Stormcrow comes with me as my husband. He's to be treated with respect and given safe conduct regardless of the judge's decision. And I want to see my father before any hearing. Agreed, Bradley said before Blackwood could protest. You can't be serious, Blackwood exploded. Bringing that savage into town. He's her husband by their law. Bradley cut him off. He has a right to be present, unless you'd prefer we settle this here and now. His hand drifted meaningfully toward his gun. Blackwood subsided, but his eyes promised violence as they prepared to return to the Apache camp. Stormcrow caught Clara's arm. You don't have to do this. We can still fight. And die. All of us. Clara shook her head. This is our chance. My love. Maybe the only one. Trust me. I trust you, he said simply. It's them I don't trust. They returned to find the Apache band ready for battle. Standing Bear listened gravely as they explained the bargain. The warriors argued fiercely. Some saw it as betrayal, others as the only hope for survival. Finally, Standing Bear raised his hand for silence. White Dove has earned the right to choose her own path. If she believes this is the way, we will honor her courage. The parting was swift and painful. Clara embraced the women who'd become her sisters, received the warriors' salutes. Standing Bear placed a hand on her head in blessing. You carry our hopes with you, daughter, he said. Whatever happens, you will always be Apache. As the band melted away into the wilderness, Clara mounted her horse to ride back to the world she'd fled. Stormcrow rode beside her, rifle across his saddle, eyes watchful. Ahead waited Blackwood's sneering face, the marshal's careful neutrality, and a town full of people who would see her as ruined, fallen, lost to savagery. But she rode with her back straight and head high. She was White Dove, wife of Stormcrow, daughter of two peoples. She had survived the desert, earned her place through blood and sacrifice, found love in the most unlikely circumstances. Now she would face their justice and show them what she'd become. The scared girl who'd fled into the night was gone. In her place rode a woman who knew her own worth, who would fight with words as fiercely as any warrior with weapons. The town appeared on the horizon like a bad dream remembered, but Clara didn't flinch. Whatever came next, she would meet it as she'd learned to meet all challenges, with courage, determination, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone. Stormcrow reached over, briefly clasping her hand. In that touch was a promise. Whatever verdict the white man's law rendered, their bond would endure. Love had found them in the harsh places between worlds, and it would not be so easily broken. The die was cast. Now all that remained was to see how it would fall. Cedar Ridge had never seen such a spectacle. The entire town turned out to witness Clara Bennett's return, lining Main Street like crows on a fence rail. Women clutched their children closer as Stormcrow rode past, his proud bearing and warrior's presence causing whispers to ripple through the crowd. Clara kept her eyes forward, ignoring the mix of pity, disgust, and morbid curiosity on familiar faces. They were taken not to the jail but to the courthouse, where Judge Thompson had hastily convened a hearing. The courtroom filled quickly, the air thick with tobacco smoke and judgment. Clara's father sat in the front row, his face gaunt from illness, but his eyes bright with tears at seeing his daughter alive. "Clara," Thomas Bennett whispered as she passed, reaching out a trembling hand. "My child, what have they done to you?" "They saved me, Papa," Clara said gently, taking his hand briefly. "I'll explain everything." Harlan Blackwood sat on the opposite side, flanked by his lawyer and several armed men. His eyes never left Clara, possession and fury warring in their gray depths. Stormcrow was made to sit in the gallery, Marshal Bradley personally ensuring no one molested him, though the deputy's hand never strayed far from his gun. Judge Thompson, a stern man with silver mutton chops, called for order. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine the validity of a marriage contract. Miss Bennett." "Mrs. White Dove," Clara corrected firmly. The judge's eyebrows rose. "We'll determine that. You claim to have married this Apache warrior. When did this occur?" 6 nights ago, Your Honor, according to Apache custom and law. Apache law holds no weight in this courtroom. Blackwood's lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, interjected. "My client has a signed contract from the woman's father, promising her hand in marriage. That predates any so-called Apache ceremony." "A contract signed under duress," Clara countered. "My father was dying, in debt, with no other options. Mr. Blackwood exploited our desperation." "That's a lie," Blackwood burst out. "I offered to save her father's life, provide for them both, and this is how she repays me? Running off with a savage? Mr. Blackwood, you'll control yourself or be removed." Judge Thompson warned. He turned back to Clara. "Can you prove this marriage took place? Do you have witnesses?" Clara's heart sank. The witnesses were scattered to the wind, fleeing for their lives. The ceremony was performed by Standing Bear, chief of the band, Stormcrow's grandmother. Singing River blessed our union before she was killed by Colonel Morrison's men. Dead witnesses and fugitive Indians. Pemberton scoffed. "How convenient." Stormcrow stood suddenly, his movement causing several men to reach for their weapons. "I will speak," he said in clear English. "You have no standing here, Indian," Pemberton sneered. "Let him speak," Judge Thompson ordered, curiosity overcoming prejudice. "But keep it brief." Stormcrow moved forward with dignity despite the hostile stares. "Your laws speak of contracts and ownership, as if a woman is cattle to be bought and sold. Among my people, marriage is sacred, 2 spirits choosing to walk the same path. White Dove chose me freely, as I chose her. We spoke our vows under the stars, sealed them with our hearts. This is more binding than any paper." "Touching," Pemberton drawled, "but irrelevant. Heathen ceremonies have no legal standing." "Is that so?" A new voice spoke from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned to see Father Miguel Santiago, the Catholic priest from the San Miguel mission. entering with a leather-bound book. Perhaps I can offer some clarity. Judge Thompson frowned. Father Santiago, this is a civil matter. Indeed, but I believe I have relevant information. The priest approached the bench. 3 days ago, a young Apache couple came to my mission. They had already been married according to Apache custom, but wished God's blessing as well. I performed a Christian ceremony, properly witnessed and recorded. He opened the register, showing the entry, Storm Crow and Clara White Dove Bennett, united in holy matrimony. The courtroom erupted. Blackwood shot to his feet, face purple with rage. This is fraud! Conspiracy! It's perfectly legal, Father Santiago said mildly. I've married many couples from different faiths who wish to ensure their union is recognized by all authorities. The young woman was quite clear about her free consent. Judge Thompson studied the register, then looked at Clara. Is this true? You underwent a Christian ceremony as well? Yes, Your Honor. We knew there might be challenges to our Apache marriage, so we wanted to be certain. Clara stood straighter. I am Storm Crow's wife by both Apache and Christian law. The contract my father signed under duress cannot supersede a valid marriage. This is outrageous, Blackwood snarled. She's mine. I paid. You paid for medical care. Clara interrupted. Not for me. I'm not property to be purchased. The law is clear. Judge Thompson said slowly. A valid marriage takes precedence over a marriage contract, if this union was indeed consensual and properly performed. Your Honor, Pemberton tried desperately. Surely you can't recognize a marriage between a white woman and an Indian. The mixing of races is not illegal in the territory of Arizona. Thompson finished, discouraged, perhaps, but not illegal. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but continued, I find the marriage between Clara Bennett and Storm Crow to be valid. The contract with Mr. Blackwood is hereby void. No! Blackwood lunged forward, reaching for Clara. Storm Crow moved faster, intercepting him with an arm across the throat. They crashed into the plaintiff's table, scattering papers. Order! Thompson shouted as the courtroom descended into chaos. Men grabbed for guns, women screamed, and Marshal Bradley waded in with his deputies to separate the combatants. When calm was restored, Blackwood stood disheveled and restrained between two deputies. His eyes burned with unhinged fury as he stared at Clara. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you can humiliate me, make me a laughingstock? I'll see you both dead first. That's a threat against a federal witness, Marshal Bradley said. Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest. As they dragged him out, still ranting, the marshal turned to Clara and Storm Crow. You two might want to leave town. Soon. He has friends, and money talks louder than law sometimes. Outside the courthouse, Thomas Bennett waited, leaning heavily on a cane. Clara approached hesitantly, unsure of her reception. Papa, He silenced her with a raised hand, then studied Storm Crow with rheumy eyes. You saved my daughter. She saved herself. Storm Crow replied. I only helped. Thomas nodded slowly. And you'll care for her, protect her, with my life. Then I suppose, the old man's voice broke. I suppose I've gained a son, even as I've lost a daughter. You haven't lost me, Papa, Clara said, embracing him carefully. I'm just different now. I can see that. He touched her face gently. Your mother would be proud. You found your own path, just like she always said you would. They stayed in town only long enough to gather supplies and say proper goodbyes. Father Santiago blessed their journey and promised to send word to the mission at San Miguel that they were coming. Marshal Bradley provided them with official papers documenting their marriage and safe passage to the border. As the sun set on their last day in Cedar Ridge, Clara stood with Storm Crow on the hill overlooking the town. Below, lights began to flicker in windows, the ordinary life of the settlement continuing as if nothing had changed. Any regrets? Storm Crow asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. None, Clara said firmly, though I wonder what happens now. Your people are gone to Mexico. My people will never fully accept us. Where do we belong? Perhaps that is our purpose, Stormcrow suggested. To create a new place, between worlds, a bridge, as you once said. Clara smiled, remembering her early days in the Apache camp, the struggle to belong. It won't be easy. The best paths never are. They mounted their horses as the first stars appeared, somewhere to the south. Standing Bear's band was finding safety across the border, somewhere behind them. Blackwood nursed his fury in a jail cell. But here, in this moment, there was only the vast desert stretching before them, full of danger and promise in equal measure. "Ready, wife?" Stormcrow asked, echoing his question from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Always, husband," Clara replied. They rode into the deepening twilight, two spirits on one path, carrying with them the hope that love might bridge the chasms that divided peoples. Behind them, the lights of Cedar Ridge grew dim and distant. Ahead lay the unknown territory of a life lived between worlds, where Apache and white, wild and civilized, old and new might find harmony. The desert welcomed them with its ancient silence, and the stars bore witness to their passage. Clara Bennett had died in flight from a forced marriage. White Dove had been born in the crucible of acceptance and struggle. Now, something new rode into the future, neither fully Apache nor white, but wholly herself, bound by love to a man who saw her true spirit. As they crested the final ridge, Clara looked back once at the world she was leaving behind. Then she turned her face forward, toward the promise of mountains and freedom, toward a life that would be difficult and dangerous and utterly their own. Stormcrow began to sing, a traveling song, meant to protect warriors on long journeys. Clara joined him, her voice blending with his in the cool night air. The song rose to the stars, a prayer and a promise, a bridge of melody spanning two worlds. In the end, love had kept its vow. She had been saved from a forced marriage only to choose her own bonds freely. And in that choosing, in that freedom to decide her own fate, Clara had found something more precious than safety or acceptance. She had found herself. The desert swallowed their song, their footprints, their passage. But somewhere in the vast space between worlds, a new story was beginning. One written not in contracts or laws, but in the choices of two hearts brave enough to forge their own path. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Stormcrow's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world this tale of courage and forbidden love has reached. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of romance and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Clara's transformation from a frightened girl to the brave white dove? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and love hearing your perspectives on these historical romances. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.